The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stone corridors of Valdoria Palace as Prince Alexander walked slowly toward the Grand Library. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each sound seeming to carry the weight of the decision he had made just hours before. The 28-year-old prince had always been known for his strength and composure, but today his shoulders seemed to bear the burden of an entire kingdom. Alexander paused before the massive oak doors of the library, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the ornate bronze handle. Behind these doors waited Princess Elena of Astoria, the woman who had captured his heart 5 years ago during a diplomatic summit. What had begun as a political alliance had blossomed into the most genuine love either of them had ever known. Elena sat by the tall windows, her auburn hair catching the morning light as she gazed out at the palace gardens. She wore a simple blue dress, the same shade as the forget-me-nots that grew wild in the meadows of her homeland. Her green eyes, usually bright with laughter and mischief, now held a sadness that seemed to reach into the very depths of her soul. "You came," she said softly, not turning from the window. Her voice carried the slight accent of her northern kingdom, musical and warm despite the pain that colored each word. "I will always come when you call for me," Alexander replied, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. The click of the latch seemed to seal them away from the world outside, creating a sanctuary where they could speak freely, perhaps for the last time. Elena finally turned to face him, and Alexander felt his heart break anew at the sight of the tears she was trying so hard to hold back. In the 5 years they had known each other, he had seen her face countless challenges with grace and courage. She had stood beside him through political crises, public scrutiny, and family pressures. She had been his anchor, his strength, his greatest joy. "The council has made their decision," Alexander said, though they both knew she already understood why he had requested this meeting. The words felt like lead in his mouth, each syllable a struggle to voice. "I know," Elena whispered. "Lord Pemberton came to see me this morning." He explained everything. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold together the pieces of her breaking heart. "The trade agreements, the military alliance with Meridia, the threat to our borders. I understand the political necessities." The kingdom of Valdoria faced its greatest crisis in 3 centuries. Their neighboring kingdom, Meridia, had offered crucial military support and trade agreements that would ensure Valdoria's survival through the coming economic storms. But Meridia's terms were clear. Prince Alexander must marry Princess Sophia of Meridia to seal the alliance. There was no room for negotiation, no alternative that the royal council would accept. Alexander moved closer to Elena, his hand reaching out to touch her face gently. "This is not what I want," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You know that, don't you? If I could choose, if the circumstances were different." "I know," Elena replied, leaning into his touch. "I have always known that duty would come before love in your world. We both knew this day might come." Despite her words, tears began to flow freely down her cheeks. They had tried so hard to make their relationship work within the constraints of royal duty. Elena had learned Valdorian customs, had won over the people with her charitable work and genuine warmth. She had transformed from a shy diplomatic daughter into a beloved figure in Valdoria. The common people adored her, the press celebrated their romance, and, for a brief, shining moment, it had seemed that love might triumph over political necessity. But the world beyond the palace walls had grown darker. Economic pressures, territorial disputes, and the constant threat of war had forced the royal council's hand. Princess Sophia of Meridia was not just a bride. She was a lifeline for an entire kingdom. "Tell me about her," Elena said suddenly, surprising Alexander with the request. "Princess Sophia. What is she like?" Alexander hesitated. He had met Sophia only twice, both times at formal diplomatic events. She was beautiful in a classical sense, with dark hair and intelligent eyes. She spoke 3 languages fluently and had been educated in politics and economics. By all accounts, she would make a suitable queen. But she was not Elena. "She is accomplished," Alexander said carefully. "Well-educated, diplomatic. The reports suggest she is kind, though reserved. She understands her duty as well as I understand mine." Elena nodded, her expression thoughtful rather than jealous. This was one of the things Alexander loved most about her, her ability to see beyond her own pain to understand the larger picture. "She will be good for Valdoria," Elena said quietly. "She will help you lead the kingdom through these difficult times." "But she will never be you," Alexander said fiercely, pulling Elena into his arms. She will never laugh at my terrible jokes, or challenge me when I'm being stubborn, or make me feel like I'm more than just a crown and a title. She will never make me feel alive the way you do. They held each other in silence as the morning light grew stronger, knowing that each moment was precious and finite. The wedding to Princess Sophia was set for 3 months hence. Elena would return to Astoria before then, resuming her life as a princess of a smaller kingdom, eventually marrying someone deemed suitable by her own family's political needs. "Promise me something," Elena whispered against Alexander's chest. "Promise me that you'll be happy. Find joy where you can, even if it's not the joy we dreamed of together. Be the king Valdoria needs, but don't lose yourself completely to duty." Alexander tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "Promise me the same," he said. "Promise me you'll find love again, real love. Promise me you'll let yourself be happy with someone who can give you everything I cannot." They both knew these were promises that would be difficult to keep, but they made them anyway, sealing their words with a kiss that tasted of tears and goodbye. Outside the library windows, life in the palace continued. Servants went about their duties, guards changed shifts, and the business of running a kingdom carried on. But, in that moment, suspended between what was and what could never be, Prince Alexander and Princess Elena existed in their own world, holding on to love even as they prepared to let it go. The first part of their goodbye had begun, and already the weight of it threatened to crush them both. Yet they found strength in each other, just as they always had, preparing to face the impossible task of loving someone enough to let them go. 3 weeks had passed since that morning in the library, and the palace had become a whirlwind of activity. Wedding preparations dominated every conversation, every corridor, every moment of Prince Alexander's waking hours. Seamstresses worked around the clock on his ceremonial uniform. Diplomats arrived daily to finalize the alliance details, and Princess Sophia herself had arrived for an extended visit to prepare for her new role as future Queen of Valdoria. Alexander stood in his private study, staring at the formal engagement portrait that had been delivered that morning. In it, he and Sophia stood side by side in the palace throne room, both dressed in their finest attire, both smiling politely for the cameras. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect royal couple, dignified, elegant, and united in purpose. But Alexander knew the truth behind the carefully composed image. During the photo session, he had been thinking of Elena, wondering what she was doing at that very moment in Astoria. Sophia, for her part, had been kind but distant, fulfilling her obligations with the same practiced grace she brought to all her royal duties. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, quickly placing the photograph face down on his desk. To his surprise, Princess Sophia herself stepped into the room. She wore an emerald green dress that complemented her dark hair, and her expression was more serious than he had seen it during their formal interactions. "Your Highness," Alexander said, rising from his chair and offering a respectful bow. Even in private, they maintained the formal protocols that governed their relationship. "Alexander," Sophia said, her voice carrying a slight tremor of uncertainty. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I felt we needed to speak privately before everything becomes even more complicated." Alexander gestured to the chairs by the fireplace, and they sat facing each other with the careful distance of two people still learning to navigate an arranged relationship. The fire crackled softly between them, casting dancing shadows on the wall. "What's on your mind?" Alexander asked gently. Despite everything, he found himself genuinely concerned for Sophia's well-being. She was far from her own home, preparing to marry a man she barely knew for the sake of political necessity. Sophia took a deep breath, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "I know about Princess Elena," she said quietly. "I know you love her." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Alexander felt his chest tighten, unsure how to respond to such directness. "I've seen how you look when you think no one is watching," Sophia continued. "I've noticed how your smile never quite reaches your eyes during our public appearances. And I've heard the whispers among the court, though they try to be discreet." Alexander leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Sophia, I want you to know that I will honor our engagement. I will be a faithful husband and do everything in my power to make this marriage work for both our kingdoms." "I know you will," Sophia replied. "Your sense of duty is one of your most admirable qualities. But that's not what I came to discuss." She paused, gathering her courage. "I wanted you to know that I don't expect you to love me, at least not in the way you love her." The honesty in her voice surprised Alexander. In their previous interactions, Sophia had been polite but guarded, revealing little of her true thoughts or feelings. "What do you expect?" Alexander asked carefully. Sophia smiled, and for the first time since her arrival, it seemed genuine. "Respect, partnership, mutual support as we navigate the challenges ahead. And perhaps, if we're fortunate, genuine friendship and affection will grow between us over time." Alexander studied her face, seeing intelligence and wisdom beyond her 24 years. Princess Sophia had clearly given this considerable thought, approaching their situation with a pragmatism that he found both admirable and somewhat heartbreaking. "You're remarkably understanding," Alexander said. "Not many people in your position would be so accepting." "I've had my own experiences with love," Sophia said quietly, looking into the fire. "There was someone in Meridia, a duke's son who served as my father's advisor. We grew up together, and I thought perhaps—" She shrugged delicately. "But duty called for both of us in different directions. He married a suitable lady of the court, and I am here with you." Alexander felt a surge of sympathy for his bride-to-be. They were both sacrificing personal happiness for the greater good, both learning to build something meaningful from the ashes of what they truly wanted. "I'm sorry," Alexander said sincerely. "This situation isn't fair to any of us." "Perhaps not," Sophia agreed. "But it is our situation nonetheless. The question is, what do we do with it?" They talked for another hour, discussing their hopes for their marriage, their concerns about leading their kingdoms, and their determination to make the best of their circumstances. As the conversation progressed, Alexander began to see glimpses of the woman behind the royal protocols, someone thoughtful, resilient, and surprisingly wise. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Astoria, Princess Elena was facing her own challenges. She had thrown herself into her charitable work with renewed intensity, visiting orphanages and hospitals throughout her kingdom. The work provided a welcome distraction from her heartbreak, but the well-meaning sympathy of everyone around her served as a constant reminder of what she had lost. Elena's mother, Queen Isabella of Astoria, had been particularly concerned about her daughter's state of mind. That evening, as Elena sat in her childhood bedroom reading reports from her latest hospital visits, her mother knocked softly on the door. "May I come in?" Isabella asked, peering around the door with the gentle expression that had comforted Elena through countless childhood sorrows. "Of course, mother," Elena replied, setting aside her papers and making room on the window seat where she had been working. Isabella settled beside her daughter, taking in the changes she had observed over the past weeks. Elena had lost weight, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usual vibrant energy seemed dimmed. "The staff at St. Catherine's Hospital spoke very highly of your visit today," Isabella said carefully. "They said you spent extra time with the children in the cancer ward." Elena smiled, the first genuine smile her mother had seen in weeks. "There was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, who reminded me of myself at that age. She was so brave, facing treatments that would frighten most adults. It put everything in perspective." Isabella reached out to smooth her daughter's hair, a gesture that carried all the comfort of maternal love. "You've always had such a generous heart, Elena. Even in your own pain, you think of others." "What else can I do?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't change what happened. I can't make the political realities disappear. But I can try to make a difference where I'm able." "And what about your own future?" Isabella asked gently. "Lord Ashworth's son has expressed interest in a formal courtship. He's a good man, Elena, kind and intelligent. Perhaps it's time to consider." "Not yet," Elena interrupted, though not unkindly. "I know I'll need to marry eventually, for political reasons if nothing else. But I'm not ready. Not yet." Isabella nodded understandingly. She had watched her daughter's love story with Prince Alexander unfold over the years, had seen the genuine joy and partnership they had shared. The loss of such a connection couldn't be easily replaced or quickly forgotten. "When you are ready," Isabella said, "remember that love takes many forms. The passionate romance you shared with Alexander was beautiful, but there are other kinds of love, quieter perhaps, but no less meaningful." Elena leaned against her mother's shoulder, finding comfort in the familiar embrace. "Did you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had married for love instead of duty?" Isabella considered the question carefully. "I did love your father, Elena, though it wasn't the sweeping romance of fairy tales. Our love grew from respect and shared purpose. We learned to be partners in life as well as in ruling. It may not have been passionate, but it was steady and true." "And you were happy?" "I was content," Isabella replied. And contentment, my dear, is not such a small thing. There is peace in it, and room for many other joys. As the evening wore on, mother and daughter talked about the future, about duty and love, about finding meaning in unexpected places. Elena began to see that her story with Alexander, while ending, was not the end of her entire story. There would be other chapters, other opportunities for happiness and fulfillment. Back in Valdoria, Alexander stood on his balcony looking up at the stars, knowing that Elena might be seeing the same constellations from her window in Astoria. Tomorrow would bring new wedding preparations, more meetings with Princess Sophia, and another day closer to his new life. But tonight, he allowed himself to remember, to grieve, and to slowly begin the process of letting go. The second part of their goodbye was learning to imagine futures without each other, and though it felt impossible, both Elena and Alexander were beginning to take the first tentative steps toward acceptance. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves as Princess Elena walked through the streets of Astoria's capital city. 2 months had passed since that heartbreaking morning in Valdoria's palace library, and Elena had gradually begun to find her footing in a world without Alexander. Today marked a special occasion, the opening of a new children's hospital wing that she had helped design and fund. Elena paused before the gleaming entrance of the St. Catherine Children's Medical Center, reading the bronze plaque that bore her name alongside those of other benefactors. The project had consumed her attention for the past 6 weeks, providing both purpose and distraction during the most difficult period of her life. "Your Highness, they're ready for you," said Lady Margaret, Elena's closest advisor and friend, who had been instrumental in helping Elena navigate her heartbreak with grace and dignity. Inside the hospital, Elena was greeted by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the chief pediatric surgeon who would be heading the new wing. Dr. Mitchell was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and steady hands that had saved countless young lives. "Princess Elena," Dr. Mitchell said warmly, "I cannot express how grateful we are for your vision and support. This new wing will allow us to treat twice as many children, with facilities that rival any hospital in the world." As they toured the bright, cheerfully decorated corridors, Elena felt a genuine sense of accomplishment. The walls were painted with murals of fairy tale characters and magical landscapes, designed to bring comfort and wonder to young patients facing frightening medical procedures. Each room was equipped with the latest technology, yet felt warm and welcoming rather than clinical. "This was your idea, wasn't it?" Dr. Mitchell asked as they entered a play therapy room filled with toys, books, and comfortable seating for families, creating spaces that feel like home rather than a hospital. Elena nodded, remembering the inspiration for the design. "When I was 8, I broke my arm quite badly in a riding accident. I spent several days in our local hospital, and I remember how scared I was by all the white walls and harsh lights. I thought if we could make medical treatment less frightening for children, perhaps they would heal faster." What Elena didn't share was that this project had become her way of channeling her grief into something positive. Every decision about colors and furniture, every detail about making the space welcoming, had been made while her heart was breaking for Alexander. Creating something beautiful from her pain had been her path toward healing. That evening, Elena attended the formal dedication ceremony, where she spoke to a gathering of doctors, city officials, and families whose children would benefit from the new facility. As she looked out at the audience, she noticed a familiar face in the back row, Lord Christopher Ashworth, the man her mother had mentioned as a potential suitor. Christopher was 32, with dark blonde hair and intelligent brown eyes. He served as Astoria's ambassador to several neighboring kingdoms and had recently returned from a successful diplomatic mission. Elena had known him casually for years, but tonight she found herself really looking at him for the first time. After her speech, Christopher approached her during the reception. "Princess Elena," he said with a respectful bow, "that was a moving address. It's clear how much this project means to you." "Thank you, Lord Ashworth," Elena replied. "I believe healing involves more than just medical treatment. Sometimes the environment can be as important as the medicine." They found themselves in conversation for nearly an hour, discussing everything from healthcare policy to their shared love of literature. Christopher was well-read and thoughtful, with a gentle sense of humor that reminded Elena why her mother had spoken so highly of him. "I hope this isn't presumptuous," Christopher said as the evening wound down, "but I wondered if you might join me for dinner sometime. Perhaps we could continue our discussion about improving rural healthcare access." Elena studied his face, seeing genuine interest rather than political ambition. She wasn't ready for romance, might not be for a long time, but she was ready for friendship and intellectual companionship. I would enjoy that, she said honestly. Though I should warn you that my heart is still healing from recent events. Christopher's expression was kind and understanding. I'm aware of your situation, Your Highness. I'm not looking to rush into anything romantic, but I would very much like to know you better as a person and as a partner in meaningful work. Meanwhile, in Valdoria, Alexander was experiencing his own moments of growth and discovery. Princess Sophia had proven to be an intelligent and capable partner in preparing for their future roles as monarchs. Their relationship had evolved from formal politeness to genuine mutual respect and even moments of comfortable companionship. On this particular evening, they were reviewing the final plans for their wedding ceremony, which was now just 3 weeks away. The event would be attended by dignitaries from across Europe, with thousands of citizens lining the streets to witness the royal procession. The florists want to confirm the final color scheme, Sophia said, reviewing a lengthy list of details that seemed to multiply daily. They've suggested white roses with gold accents throughout the cathedral. Alexander nodded absently, his mind wandering as it often did during these planning sessions. Sophia noticed his distraction immediately. She had become adept at reading his moods over the past weeks. You're thinking about her again, Sophia observed quietly, setting down her papers. Alexander looked up, surprised by her directness. They had maintained a careful politeness in their interactions, rarely acknowledging the emotional complexities of their situation. I'm sorry, Alexander said. That's not fair to you. Actually, I think it is fair, Sophia replied thoughtfully. You loved her deeply, and that love doesn't simply disappear because circumstances have changed. I would be more concerned if you could turn your feelings on and off so easily. Alexander studied his fiancée with growing appreciation. You're remarkably wise for someone so young. Sophia smiled, an expression that transformed her usually serious face. My governess always said that wisdom comes from paying attention to life, not from accumulating years. Besides, I'm not as young as you might think. Meridia's political situation has required me to grow up quickly. They returned to their wedding plans, but the conversation had shifted something between them. There was less formality, more genuine communication. When they disagreed about the music selections, they debated the merits of different composers with actual passion rather than polite deference. You know, Sophia said as they worked, I think we might actually become friends. Real friends, not just political allies. Alexander felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced in months. Not love, not the passionate connection he had shared with Elena, but something valuable nonetheless, the possibility of genuine partnership with someone he was coming to respect and care for. I hope so, he replied sincerely. I think friendship might be a stronger foundation for a royal marriage than passion anyway. Passion fades, but friendship can last a lifetime. As the weeks passed, both Elena and Alexander were learning to build new relationships from the ruins of their lost love. Elena's friendship with Christopher deepened into something that might, someday, become more. Alexander and Sophia discovered a compatibility that surprised them both. The third part of their goodbye was perhaps the most crucial, learning that moving forward didn't mean forgetting, and that new love didn't diminish what they had shared. Both were discovering that the human heart, while finite in some ways, had an infinite capacity for different kinds of love and connection. Neither had stopped loving the other, and perhaps they never would completely. But they were learning to love others as well, in different ways, for different reasons. And in that learning, they were both finding a kind of peace they had thought impossible just months before. The cathedral bells of Valdoria rang out across the kingdom on a crisp December morning, their bronze voices announcing the dawn of Prince Alexander's wedding day. Snow had fallen during the night, covering the palace grounds and city streets in a pristine white blanket that seemed to hush the world in preparation for the momentous occasion. Alexander stood before the tall windows of his private chambers, already dressed in his ceremonial military uniform adorned with the ancient medals and ribbons of Valdorian royalty. The deep blue fabric was embroidered with gold thread and patterns that told the history of his lineage, each symbol carrying the weight of centuries of tradition and duty. Your Highness, it's time, announced Sir Edmund, Alexander's longtime valet and confidant, who had served the royal family for over 30 years. His voice carried both formality and genuine affection for the young prince he had helped raise. Alexander nodded, taking one final look at his reflection in the ornate mirror. The man looking back at him appeared every inch the future king, composed, dignified, ready to lead a nation. Only Alexander could see the shadow of sadness that lingered in his eyes, a ghost of the love he was laying to rest on this day of new beginnings. 3 miles away, in a small chapel in the countryside of Astoria, Princess Elena knelt in prayer as the same morning sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns on the stone floor. She wore a simple, white dress, not a wedding gown, but the color felt appropriate for what she had come to think of as her own ceremony of letting go. Elena had chosen this particular chapel because it was where she had often come as a child when she needed comfort or guidance. The ancient stones seemed to hold centuries of whispered prayers and quiet hopes, and today she added her own to their number. "Grant me the strength to love again," she whispered, her words barely audible in the sacred silence. "Help me honor what was while embracing what may be." Father Benedict, the elderly priest who had baptized Elena as an infant, sat quietly in the front pew, providing a comforting presence without intruding on her private moment of prayer. He had watched this remarkable young woman grow from a spirited child into a compassionate leader, and his heart ached for the sacrifice she was making in the name of duty and the greater good. Back in Valdoria, the cathedral filled with guests from across Europe and beyond. Diplomats in formal dress, foreign royalty in their finest regalia, and representatives from every major kingdom gathered to witness the union that would shape the political landscape for generations to come. Princess Sophia arrived at the cathedral in a horse-drawn carriage that had been used for royal weddings for over 200 years. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, ivory silk adorned with pearls and diamonds, with a train that stretched 20 feet behind her. The meridian crown jewels adorned her dark hair, which had been arranged in an elegant style that honored both kingdoms' traditions. Yet despite her breathtaking appearance, those who knew Sophia well could see the nervousness in her eyes as she prepared to walk down the aisle toward a man she respected but did not love, to begin a life that was chosen for her rather than chosen by her. As the wedding ceremony began, every word was broadcast across both kingdoms through radio waves that carried the ancient vows to millions of listeners. In Astoria, Elena sat in her chapel listening to the familiar words of the marriage service, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously as she heard Alexander promise to love, honor, and cherish his new bride. "Do you, Alexander Edmund Charles, Prince of Valdoria, take Sophia Catherine, Princess of Meridia, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The archbishop's voice resonated through the cathedral and across the airwaves. "I do," Alexander replied, his voice strong and clear, carrying the conviction of his commitment to duty and to the woman standing beside him. Elena closed her eyes as she heard those two simple words, feeling as though a chapter of her life was being sealed shut forever. Yet alongside the pain, she felt something unexpected, a sense of release, as if a burden she had been carrying was finally being lifted from her shoulders. When Sophia spoke her own vows, Elena was surprised to hear genuine warmth in the princess's voice. Whatever else this marriage might be, it was clear that Sophia was entering it with sincerity and hope. The ceremony concluded with the traditional bells and fanfare, and Alexander and Sophia emerged from the cathedral as husband and wife, king and queen-elect, partners in the great work of leading their joined kingdoms through uncertain times. That evening, as wedding celebrations continued throughout Valdoria, Elena found herself in the palace gardens of Astoria with Lord Christopher. They had been spending increasing time together over the past month, and their friendship had deepened into something that felt like the beginning of love, different from what she had shared with Alexander, but real and meaningful in its own right. "How are you feeling?" Christopher asked gently as they walked among the winter roses that bloomed despite the cold. He had been remarkably patient and understanding throughout Elena's healing process, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. "Sad," Elena admitted honestly, "but also free somehow. Does that make sense?" Christopher nodded thoughtfully. "I think it makes perfect sense. Sometimes we need to fully grieve what we've lost before we can appreciate what we might gain." They paused beside a fountain whose waters sparkled in the moonlight, and Elena felt a sense of peace settle over her heart. "Christopher," she said quietly, "I think I'm ready to truly move forward. Not just in friendship, but in more." Christopher's face lit up with joy, though he remained gentle in his response. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel pressured by timing or circumstances." Elena smiled, and For the first time in months, it was a smile unclouded by grief. I'm certain. What I had with Alexander was beautiful, and I'll always treasure it. But I'm beginning to understand that love isn't finite. The heart doesn't have just one chance at happiness. Meanwhile, in Valdoria, Alexander and Sophia stood on the balcony of their royal suite, looking out over the celebrations taking place in the city below. Thousands of citizens had gathered in the squares to toast their new queen, and fireworks painted the night sky in brilliant colors. We did it, Sophia said quietly, her hand resting lightly on Alexander's arm. We're actually married. Alexander covered her hand with his own, a gesture that felt both formal and genuinely affectionate. We did. How do you feel, Your Majesty? Sophia laughed at the title, which was still new to both of them. Terrified and hopeful in equal measure. And you? The same, Alexander admitted. But also grateful. Grateful for your patience, your wisdom, your willingness to build something real with me despite the unusual circumstances. They had spent the day playing their parts perfectly. The devoted newlyweds, the united royal couple, the embodiment of hope for their kingdom's futures. But now, in the privacy of their own space, they could speak honestly about their hopes and fears. I want you to know, Sophia said carefully, that I don't expect you to forget her. Princess Elena was clearly an extraordinary woman, and what you shared was genuine. I would never ask you to pretend that love didn't exist. Alexander turned to face his new wife, struck once again by her remarkable maturity and compassion. And I want you to know that I'm committed to making this marriage work. Not just for political reasons, but because I genuinely care about you and believe we can build something meaningful together. As the fourth part of their goodbye reached its conclusion, both Elena and Alexander had discovered something profound, the capacity of the human heart to hold multiple loves simultaneously. Elena's love for Alexander would always be part of her, but it no longer prevented her from loving Christopher. Alexander's memories of Elena would always be treasured, but they no longer stood in the way of building a genuine partnership with Sophia. The wedding day had marked not just the beginning of a new marriage, but the completion of an emotional journey that had transformed pain into wisdom, loss into growth, and endings into new beginnings. Both Elena and Alexander were learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them go completely, freeing them to find happiness elsewhere while finding your own happiness in unexpected places. 5 years had passed since that snowy December wedding day, and the seasons had turned through cycles of joy and sorrow, growth and challenge, healing and renewal. The kingdoms of Valdoria and Meridia had prospered under the joint leadership of King Alexander and Queen Sophia, their political alliance having evolved into a genuine partnership that surprised even their most optimistic supporters. In the royal gardens of Valdoria Palace, Queen Sophia sat on a marble bench watching her 3-year-old son, Prince Edmund, chase butterflies among the roses. The little boy had his father's dark hair and his mother's intelligent eyes, and his laughter filled the morning air with pure joy. Sophia's hand rested gently on her growing belly. She was 6 months pregnant with their second child. King Alexander approached from the palace, having just concluded a successful negotiation with neighboring kingdoms regarding trade agreements that would benefit the entire region. His face showed the confidence of a man who had grown into his role as a leader, but also the contentment of someone who had found unexpected happiness in his personal life. How are my favorite people? Alexander asked, settling beside Sophia on the bench and pulling young Edmund onto his lap when the boy ran over to greet him. Papa, I caught a butterfly, Edmund announced proudly, though his empty hands suggested the creature had been more elusive than he claimed. Did you? Alexander replied with the serious tone he reserved for discussions of his son's great achievements. What color was it? As father and son discussed the finer points of butterfly hunting, Sophia watched them with a smile that reflected deep contentment. Her marriage to Alexander had grown slowly but surely into genuine love, not the passionate, desperate connection he had once shared with Elena, but something steady and enduring that had room for friendship, respect, and growing affection. The ambassador from Astoria will be arriving next week for the trade summit, Sophia mentioned casually, though she watched Alexander's face carefully as she spoke. Alexander nodded, his expression remaining calm, though Sophia noticed the slight tension that always appeared when Elena's kingdom was mentioned. Lord Christopher, isn't it? I believe he's quite accomplished in international relations. Yes, Lord Christopher, Sophia confirmed. He's married now, you know. to Princess Elena. The reports suggest they're very happy together. Alexander was quiet for a moment, processing this information. 3 years ago, such news might have caused him pain. But now he felt something different, a genuine gladness that Elena had found the love and happiness she deserved. I'm glad to hear it, Alexander said sincerely. She deserves every happiness. Meanwhile, in the coastal kingdom of Astoria, Princess Elena, now the Duchess of Ashworth following her marriage to Christopher, stood in the nursery of their estate, singing a lullaby to her 18-month-old daughter, Catherine. The little girl had Elena's auburn hair and Christopher's warm brown eyes, and she was the light of her parents' lives. Elena's marriage to Christopher had been everything her mother had promised it could be, built on friendship and respect. It had grown into a love that was different from what she had shared with Alexander, but no less meaningful. Christopher was patient where Alexander had been passionate, steady where Alexander had been intense, but equally devoted to their shared life and work. She's finally asleep, Elena whispered as Christopher joined her in the nursery, wrapping his arms around his wife from behind as they both gazed down at their sleeping daughter. Just in time, Christopher murmured against her ear, I have news from the diplomatic service. We've been invited to represent Astoria at the Trade Summit in Valdoria next month. Elena stiffened slightly in his arms, though she had known this day would eventually come. In 5 years, she and Alexander had managed to avoid any direct meetings, their kingdom's business being conducted through intermediaries and formal diplomatic channels. How do you feel about that? Christopher asked gently, understanding the complexity of emotions his wife might be experiencing. Elena turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had helped her heal and learn to love again. Nervous, she admitted, but also ready, I think. It's been 5 years, Christopher. We're different people now, living different lives. Perhaps it's time to put the past fully to rest. Christopher studied her face, seeing the strength and peace that had replaced the heartbreak he had witnessed during their early courtship. Are you certain? We can send someone else if you prefer. No, Elena said firmly. I'm the kingdom's expert on trade policy, and this summit is too important to be handled by anyone else. Besides, I think we need to see each other one final time, to say goodbye properly, as the people we've become rather than the people we were. The weeks leading up to the summit passed quickly for both kingdoms. Preparations were extensive, as the gathering would include representatives from 12 nations and would likely shape regional politics for the next decade. Elena arrived in Valdoria on a crisp autumn morning, accompanied by Christopher and a small diplomatic team. As their carriage rolled through the familiar streets toward the palace, Elena felt her heart rate quicken despite her determination to remain composed. The palace itself looked exactly as she remembered it, its ancient stones weathered but eternal, its gardens still perfectly maintained. Yet Elena noticed that she was seeing it now with different eyes, not as a place where she had dreamed of making her home, but as the seat of a foreign government with which her own kingdom sought to maintain good relations. The formal reception was held in the Great Hall, with representatives from all participating kingdoms gathering for the opening ceremony. Elena and Christopher entered together, and Elena immediately spotted Alexander at the far end of the room, standing beside Queen Sophia as they greeted arriving dignitaries. Alexander had aged well. The responsibilities of kingship had added gravitas to his bearing without dimming the warmth in his eyes. Queen Sophia, Elena noted, appeared radiant despite her advancing pregnancy, and the way she and Alexander moved together spoke of genuine partnership and affection. When protocol finally brought Elena and Christopher to the receiving line, Elena found herself face to face with Alexander for the first time in 5 years. The moment was watched by dozens of other diplomats and court officials, requiring both of them to maintain perfect royal composure. Your Majesty, Elena said, offering the precisely correct curtsy for a duchess meeting a foreign king. Your Majesty, she added, turning to Sophia. Your Grace, Alexander replied with equal formality, though Elena noticed the slight warmth in his voice that indicated genuine pleasure at seeing her. May I present my wife, Queen Sophia? Sophia, this is the Duchess of Ashworth and her husband, Lord Christopher. The introductions were completed flawlessly, with both couples maintaining the perfect balance of friendliness and diplomatic distance. To outside observers, they appeared to be nothing more than royal colleagues meeting for the first time. But Elena and Alexander had recognized something profound in that brief exchange. They were genuinely happy for each other. The love they had shared had been transformed by time and distance into something else, a deep, abiding wish for each other's well-being that asked for nothing in return. The summit continued for 3 days, with Elena and Alexander working together professionally on trade agreements and regional security issues. Their interactions were cordial and productive, marked by mutual respect for each other's expertise and positions. On the final evening, a grand ball was held to celebrate the successful conclusion of the negotiations. Elena danced with Christopher, with various foreign dignitaries, and eventually found herself partnered with Alexander for a single, ceremonial dance that protocol demanded. As they moved together across the dance floor, surrounded by other couples and watched by hundreds of guests, Elena and Alexander found themselves able to speak privately for the first time in years. "You look well," Alexander said quietly as they turned through the prescribed steps of the formal waltz. "Marriage agrees with you, as it does you," Elena replied, glancing toward where Sophia sat with other expectant mothers, glowing with health and happiness. "Queen Sophia is remarkable. You chose well." "I didn't choose," Alexander reminded her with a slight smile. "But I got remarkably lucky nonetheless." They danced in comfortable silence for a few moments, both aware that this would likely be their final private conversation. "Elena," Alexander said as the music began to wind down, "I want you to know that loving you taught me how to love. What we shared made me capable of building something beautiful with Sophia. I'll always be grateful for that gift." Elena felt tears threaten, but they were tears of healing rather than sorrow. "And loving you taught me that the heart is infinite in its capacity for joy. What I learned with you allowed me to recognize and embrace the love Christopher offered. We gave each other something precious, even if we couldn't keep it." The music ended, and they separated with proper royal distance, bowing and curtsying as protocol required. But their eyes met for one last moment, and in that glance, they achieved something that had eluded them 5 years earlier, a goodbye that was complete and peaceful, unmarked by regret or bitterness. As Elena and Christopher prepared to depart Valdoria the following morning, Elena took one last look at the palace from her carriage window. But this time, she felt no sadness, no sense of loss. Instead, she felt gratitude for love found and lost and found again in different form, for lessons learned through heartbreak, for the strength discovered in letting go. Both Elena and Alexander had learned the most difficult truth about love. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do for someone is to love them enough to let them find happiness elsewhere, while finding the courage to build your own happiness with open hands and an open heart. The final goodbye was not spoken in words, but in the peaceful acceptance that their love story had ended exactly as it needed to, not with bitterness or regret, but with gratitude for what had been and joy for what had become. They had loved each other completely, lost each other necessarily, and found their separate ways to contentment and new love. In the end, their story became a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the possibility of finding multiple forms of happiness in a single lifetime. Their love had been real and transformative, and their goodbye, stretched across 5 years of growth and change, had been just as real and just as transformative. Both Elena and Alexander carried forward into their new lives the best of what they had shared while remaining open to the different, but equally meaningful loves that awaited them. And in that openness, they found not just personal happiness, but the wisdom to lead their people with hearts that understood both sacrifice and hope. The kingdoms prospered, the marriages flourished, and the love that had once seemed like the end of everything became instead the beginning of wisdom, compassion, and the deep peace that comes from choosing others' happiness over your own pain. Their final goodbye was complete.